A 21st century conflict that completely rewired the globe. I mean, the borders, the alliances, and the politics of the modern world were just fundamentally reshaped by what we're going to look at today.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, our mission is to break down the complex timeline of the Iraq War. We're keeping it strictly chronological, moving from the fallout of 1991 right on through to how it literally built the modern Middle East.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The seeds of the 2003 conflict, they were actually sown way earlier, back in the turbulent 1990s. Think about it. In 1991, the Gulf War ends, but that regional tension never truly goes away. Fast forward to 1998, and UN weapons inspectors pull out of Iraq, creating a massive intelligence blind spot for the international community. And then we hit 2001. The devastating September 11th attacks trigger an immediate, highly aggressive shift in global security protocols and how we assess threats.
But sandwiched between 91 and 2001 was a grueling decade of containment. The UN enforced these severe economic sanctions, which led to the highly controversial Oil for Food program, all in an attempt to cripple the regime's military from bouncing back. But here's the thing. This intense pressure cooker environment, it laid the exact groundwork for the conflict we're examining today. The region basically became a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
And that spark, that definitive turning point, was the post-9/11 era. This was the exact moment the geopolitical landscape and United States threat assessments completely fractured. The foreign policy paradigm shifted almost overnight from a strategy of containment to one of preemption. You might know it as the Bush Doctrine. Suddenly, the tolerance for ambiguous threats evaporated entirely, and Iraq was placed squarely in the crosshairs of this new, highly assertive defense posture.
To really understand the lead-up to military action, we have to neutrally separate the pre-war claims that drove policy from the historically verified facts. Assertions at the time, like those famously presented at the UN, focused heavily on claims of active weapons of mass destruction programs, painting Iraq as an imminent threat to global security. But we have to separate that from what was verified later. Post-war investigations ultimately concluded that no active stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction actually existed at the time of the invasion.
And this brilliantly illustrates the intense geopolitical scramble that followed those initial intelligence claims. I mean, the world didn't just march to war overnight. Led by the US and the UK, a massive diplomatic effort rapidly assembled what was called the Coalition of the Willing. This actually included troops from over 30 different countries coming together to support military intervention.
March 20th, 2003. After years of intense sanctions, UN debates, and shifting policies, this is the definitive point of no return. The invasion officially begins. Diplomatic channels close up, and raw military action takes over. The entire world watched in real time as this historic conflict finally ignited.
The military strategy here was defined by sheer velocity. It all started with those famous shock and awe airstrikes in the early hours, designed to completely neutralize command and control centers. Almost immediately after, coalition ground forces rapidly crossed the borders from the south. It was a relentless, highly mechanized military advance, driving straight through the desert toward the heart of the country, Baghdad.
By April 2003, we witnessed the swift and total collapse of the old regime. This was just a monumental turning point in modern history. A lot of us remember that iconic footage of Saddam's statue being pulled down in Firdos Square. Those deeply entrenched power structures that had controlled Iraq for decades dissolved in mere weeks.
Let's move ahead and see how this builds, because the story definitely doesn't end with the fall of the capital. 8 months later, Operation Red Dawn culminated in the high-profile capture of Saddam Hussein, who was found hiding in a literal spider hole near his hometown of Tikrit. This was a massive psychological victory for the coalition forces and effectively closed the final chapter on his absolute rule.
But removing the regime created a massive, incredibly dangerous power vacuum. The fall of the government wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a complex, devastating, and unexpected insurgency. Instead of immediate stability, coalition forces suddenly faced a highly complex web of Ba'athist remnants, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and sectarian militias. It sparked years of brutal urban warfare that would severely grip the country.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it formalizes the final conclusions of the intelligence timeline we touched on earlier. While the insurgency raged on, exhaustive post-war investigations were being conducted on the ground by groups like the Iraq Survey Group. Their findings, known as the Dulfer Report, officially verified the opposite of those pre-war assertions. No active WMD programs actually existed. This stark discrepancy remains one of the most heavily analyzed and debated aspects of the entire conflict.
But zooming out from the immediate military timeline for a second, the fallout of this war went way beyond Iraq's borders. The dust had settled on the initial invasion, sure, but a deep, lingering historical shift was just taking root across the entire region.
Looking at the long-term consequences, we can clearly see exactly why this matters to us today. The geopolitical shifts were massive. First, you have severe, prolonged destabilization within Iraq itself, which affected millions of civilians. Second, removing Iraq as a regional counterweight caused huge shifts in Middle East power dynamics. Most notably, it opened the door for a rapid expansion of Iranian influence across the region. And on a global scale, it permanently altered how nations approach intelligence gathering and military intervention, all fundamentally informed by the hard lessons of 2003.
Which leaves us here, from the intense sanctions of the 90s to a swift invasion and through a grueling insurgency. We really have to look at the enduring legacy of this timeline. How did the events of 2003 permanently alter the modern global balance of power? That is the question that continues to define the 21st century. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.